has been the center of headlines for almost 2 years now. And I knew that I didn't want to spend my time here at TEDx talking about the effect of social distancing on our lives or anything very COVID-19 related. Instead, I want to talk about a different kind of social distancing, that of the distance between the rich and the poor with regards to the issue of food insecurity. Now, if I ask everyone here what food waste is, I'm sure hands will shoot up into the air. But what about food insecurity? Does anyone know what food insecurity is? Anybody want to answer? Okay, that's kind of on the right track. Does anybody else want to try? Yeah. Sorry, can you repeat that? Okay, so for people on the live stream, one person said is when you don't have food, and another person said when you don't want to eat specific food. Now, when we talk about food waste, as you see in this picture, we're actually talking about food that is disposed of that could otherwise have been consumed. But when we talk about food insecurity, we're talking about people. Food insecurity is the inability of people to afford a sufficient quantity of nutritious food. It is a problem faced by poorer people in the population. Now, food insecurity is a global issue that is often overshadowed by more visible issues like global warming, climate change, etc. I first learned about the issue when I read a series of articles in the Straits Times titled Live More, Waste Less. My mother actually led an initiative called Zero Food Waste on behalf of DVS, and it was she who encouraged me to volunteer at the Food Bank Singapore, where I learned a lot about the relation between food waste and food insecurity. Here are actually a few pictures of me sitting at the food bank and inventorizing food. So to give you all a little bit of context, the Food Bank Singapore collects packaged food that would otherwise go to waste and redistributes this to over 360 beneficiary organizations around the country, meeting the twin objectives of reducing food waste and reducing food insecurity. Now, I'm sure you all must be wondering, in a first world country like Singapore, is food insecurity really a problem? But you will be shocked to hear that 1 in 10 Singaporean households have faced food insecurity in the last 12 months. In fact, 2 in every 5 households face food insecurity at least once a month. So what causes food insecurity? Now, naturally, the answer to this question is quite complex as there are many factors that lead to the issue, but I want to narrow my discussion on one of these, disrupted food supply chain. This is an issue that has been exacerbated by the pandemic and has led to global food insecurity on a very, very large scale. So what exactly is the food supply chain? Now we can think of the food supply chain like a line of people who simply have to pass a ball from one person to the next, the objective being for the ball to reach from the first person to the last person. Now, if the ball is passed along this line flawlessly, no loss is incurred. But every time the ball is dropped, then the chain of people as a whole has to pay $10. Naturally, the more the ball is dropped, the more the chain of people loses. Now let's think of this first person here as the producer in the supply chain and that last person as the consumer. The act of the ball being dropped can be considered to be a supply chain bottleneck or disruption. So what exactly causes these bottleneck disruptions? Well, labor shortages in COVID-19 has led to a significant fall in the supply and manufacturing of shipping containers, and transport disruptions have restricted the movement of perishable goods like food. Now, COVID-19 induced lockdowns have also disrupted production of food on the farm level, especially in those farms that are reliant on hands-on labor work on their farms. But what do these bottlenecks mean for food insecurity? Well, basic economic theory states that as costs increase, price will increase as well. And this is exactly what has happened. In fact, an index created by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations found that prices were a third higher in August 2021 than in 2020. Now, a 30% increase in the price of food is unlikely to even register with the richer people in society because this is such a small piece of their income. But for poorer people, those who live hand to mouth on a daily basis, the effects can be absolutely devastating. An increase in food prices means that in order to be able to afford the same 1 kg packet of rice, they need to give up spending on meat, on vegetables, on other food products because they cannot afford both at the same time. Worst of all, in the pandemic, it is this segment of the population that has been hardest hit by COVID-19 restrictions. And this is what we are seeing around the world. Labor shortages and other supply chain disruptions are threatening the recovery of countries that have barely begun to recover from the effects of the pandemic. In fact, the owner of the Two Sisters Group, Britain's largest chicken producer, Mr. Ranjit Singh Buparan, has said, the days when you could feed a family of four with a 3-pound chicken are coming to an end, which is absolutely terrifying news for already food insecure households. Food insecurity has risen exponentially in the last couple of years. In 2020, 2.37 billion people lacked access to adequate food. That is 30%, I repeat, 30% of the entire global population. This number has risen by 320 million in just 1 year. Now you guys see this red region over here? That is the United States of America on the world map. And USA has a population of 329 million. So can you imagine? The number of food insecure people rose by almost the entire population of the USA in just 1 year. Shocking, right? Now, other than supply chain disruptions, one of the biggest underlying causes of food insecurity is obviously low income. Unemployed people who don't have access to income or people working in low paid jobs are more likely to struggle to afford food on a regular basis. We talk about the elderly. There are many elderly that are reliant on saving and that do not have a support system. They may also be food insecure. Sick people with illnesses whose treatment takes up a huge proportion of income can also struggle to afford food on a daily basis. Even family size is shown to lead to food insecurity. Now, a research conducted in Singapore found a direct correlation between food insecurity and family size. And this is where developing countries actually face a significant problem because a lot of families in these countries work on farms and they have more children because they need the extra hands-on help on their farms. But more people equals more mouths to feed and therefore leads to an increase in food insecurity. So families in these countries, developing countries, are stuck in a lose-lose situation. So that's about food insecurity on a global scale. But let me narrow my discussion a little bit to food insecurity in Singapore. What does supply chain disruptions and global food insecurity mean for Singapore? And before I go into that, I have a question for all of you. Singapore imports a lot of its goods. Does anyone know the exact percentage of food that is imported in Singapore? Any guesses? 85, that's close. Anybody else? Sorry, can you repeat? 75. That's close. Anyone else want to try? Last one. 95.14%. That's awfully specific. But the actual answer is 90%. 90% of all of Singapore's food comes from overseas. So what does this mean? Rising prices globally will translate into rising food prices in our country. And this is what has happened. In fact, the Straits Times recently released an article that said food price inflation rose by 1.6% last month. And what this means is that food prices are not just rising, but are rising at an even faster rate. Again, an increase in food prices won't even affect the richer people in society, but for poorer people, the effects can be devastating. it can reduce their standards of living and significantly increase their food insecurity. Now, because food insecurity is a concept that is very closely related to income levels, policies to reduce income inequality, to reduce poverty, can help reduce food insecurity. And this is where the government has a very important role to play. I want to talk a little bit about what Singapore is doing because I really believe that it is a role model for other countries and how to deal with the issue. Unique government schemes. Now, the government has schemes in place like ComCare. What ComCare does is it provides short-term and long-term financial assistance to families in need. But it doesn't just provide this assistance. It also gives households guidance on how to become self-reliant in the future, which kind of catapulting. The government has also has a GST voucher scheme in place since 2012 to exempt poorer households from paying the sales tax when they buy necessities like food, therefore ensuring that they are able to continue to afford food on a regular basis and are not hindered by the sales tax. The government has also introduced schemes specifically for the pandemic, as it was recently announced that it would be issuing $100 worth of grocery vouchers to 160,000 recipients to purchase food and other necessities at supermarkets. And this was not even the first batch in the scheme, as the recipients were given $300 worth of vouchers last year. Now, $100, $300, this does not sound like a lot of money for richer people in society. But believe me when I say that the government support is absolutely invaluable for poorer households suffering from food insecurity. More generally, the government is also working to bring together the private sector and non-profit organizations committed to combat food insecurity so as to streamline help to those households that require it the most. And these factors have certainly helped. Singapore is ranked the world's fourth most food secure nation on the Global Food Insecurity Index. But of course, this does not mean that the issue does not exist, as there's a lot more that we need to do to get rid of the issue. Now, because this is a youth conference, I would like to end my talk by talking a little bit about what we can do as members of the community and future leaders. Firstly, awareness and advocacy. Now, by standing here and speaking for the last 10 to 15 minutes about food insecurity, I hope that I have sparked some awareness of the issue in each and every one of you. We all play a role in creating and spreading awareness of the issue, especially because it is very, very easily overshadowed by other more visible issues. Secondly, converting awareness into action. Now, a lot of us do not value food because it's so easily available. But when we stop to think about the huge amount of resources that go into the production of food and the fact that there are so many people that do not have access to food on a daily basis, we will all become true foodies and start treating food as a treasure. In our daily lives, we can do small things like just reducing the amount of food we waste to indirectly help food insecure people in Singapore and around the world. And finally, volunteering. Now, I showed you some pictures of me volunteering at the Food Bank Singapore, and non-profit organizations like the Food Bank or Willing Hearts SG are always on the lookout for volunteers to help them redistribute food to households who need it. If we volunteer our time and our effort to these organizations, then we can help them help the food insecure. And it's really fun. Like, believe me, I've had a lot of fun just volunteering. So with COVID-19 and social distancing continuing to dominate headlines even today, I strongly believe that we should focus on taking small actions to reduce the social distances present in our community. Thank you.